Hello and welcome back to the Movie Pope podcast. And today we are going to be wrapping up February and our review of contenders for the 2026 Academy Awards by taking a look at The Secret Agent. Now, for most of season 5, we have been looking at several movies that have been in the running. We have looked at movies such as Sinners, K-pop Demon Hunters, Wicked for Good, as well as Frankenstein, and even Begonia, which was a bit weird, but at the same time, it wasn't too much of a head well, I was gonna say head scratcher, much of a brain twister, really.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah, but here with The Secret Agent, this is actually the first foreign language movie that we've reviewed in quite a while, Lee. And it's kind of a shame too, because whenever we're talking about movies, we're mainly focusing in the Anglosphere, right? So movies, from the US, the UK, occasionally Canada or Australia, but we never really give that much thought about movies from other countries and other cultures, right? I think the last movie you and I really took a look at that was in a foreign language was RRR, and that was all the way back from season 1. I guess you could count K-pop Demon Hunters, but I would put an asterisk on that just because it technically was an American production. Or I should say, an American co-production with South Korea, right? So, and also it wasn't English too, so it wasn't like we had to watch it in Korean with English subtitles. But but at least for you and I, this will probably be the second foreign language movie that we reviewed, and on the channel we have reviewed foreign language films. I mean, Art and we did a review of several select Soviet era films, which you can check out on the playlist that we have got curated for you. And the biggest thing that I've noticed when watching these movies is the fact that they don't necessarily follow the same playbook that you would expect from an English speaking movie, right? Because you and I have done this long enough to recognize the pattern in terms of the story beats and how an American or British or Australian director is going to tell, a story, right? It's very conventional, whether it's set in, 18th century England or early 20th century Australia or New York in the present day, they all follow similar story beats, right? So, in a way, we can predict where they're going because we're familiar with their patterns. Whereas movies made in Latin America, India, South Korea, China, Russia, wherever, they're not going to necessarily follow the same, the same patterns. But and I think it's kind of a shame that we don't really take a closer look at these movies, because it would kind of open up our minds and kind of help us understand and appreciate that they're just as capable of telling stories that are as equally powerful and as equally relevant, but because of the way that they're telling these stories or the way that they're approaching, the narrative isn't familiar to what we're used to, we kind of push it aside because we're just saying, well, we don't really understand why you're doing it this way, so we're just gonna you can go play in that sandbox, we'll play in the sandbox, and we'll all be happy about that. I would even suggest, going forward, at least every season we review one foreign language film, because at least that way it kind of gives us an opportunity to not only watch and appreciate movies from other cultures and other languages, but hey, I mean, I have noticed that we do get an uptick in views whenever we do review of foreign language films. I know when we did our review of Stalker by Tarkovsky, we got quite a lot of traffic from those reviews. So The Secret Agent is set in 1977 during the time of the military dictatorship in Brazil. And when you first watch it, Lee, I know in the text message you sent last night, it was pretty much of a slow burn, right?
Yes.
And that's pretty typical of what you would see with these foreign language movies, because they take quite a long time to kind of get to the point. And as I mentioned when Art and I did a review of Solaris, it's almost frustrating because we've been conditioned to kind of expect things to happen right away. But in order to understand and appreciate foreign language films, you kind of have to alter your way of thinking in order to fully understand and appreciate it, right?
I disagree. I'm sorry, but I disagree with that. Like, a movie can be good regardless of who's creating it. And I mean, like, for instance, we both like RRR, right? And I mean, I don't think that that was necessarily took a long time to get going. I've seen films like City of God, which I thought was fantastic. That's like probably up there in my top 10, maybe 20 favorite movies, or something like that. Once again, something that came from Brazil, right? And that's all done in Portuguese. So I think that there's other stuff out there. Now, I will say this, right? I am not a connoisseur of foreign films, right? So I definitely don't want to go out there and pretend like I have all this great wealth of knowledge with it. But I have definitely seen films that I would consider good, and they're good for all those same reasons that I would watch anything, right? I mean, story is something that transcends how you do it, right? So I would disagree with the idea that because we have to alter how we're looking at something because it's different. Well, if you don't like something, you don't like something, right? Like, you don't have to alter the way you feel about something. Now, you absolutely do have to give it a shot, right? I'm not saying don't go out there and kind of rebuke anything just because it doesn't go with the approach that you have. But if you're not a fan of how storytelling is, I feel like trying to force yourself to enjoy something is never the right approach.
Well, how many foreign language? Sorry, but how many foreign language movies have you seen besides the ones you just mentioned?
Let's see. I watched Anatomy of the Kill. That was out 2 years ago. I watched. Oh, what was that? What was that war movie that came out last year? I've watched like a handful of them over the course of the past few years. I don't remember what it was called though. But like I said, I mean, as I said, I'm not gonna pretend like that I am some connoisseur of all these foreign films or anything like that. But I also feel like, if I'm going to enjoy something, I'm going to enjoy it because I feel like it hits the things that I care about in a film, right? So whether it's like an old black and white film or a new film, if it's a foreign film, it all follows, at least in my mind, the same formula of what I like to see in a movie. That's not going to alter or change because of the way it is, right? I mean, let's not also forget that I watch tons of stuff like anime, right? Which is all foreign, which, I mean, granted, not quite probably in the same boat that you're thinking of. But, it's one of those things where, if I like something, I'm going to like it because of what it brings to the table. There might be aspects of it that I don't enjoy just because maybe it just doesn't mesh with me, just from a cultural standpoint, which, as you pointed out, right, that's a lack of my knowledge of that area. And certainly something like this, right, this happened in a very dark time. And because I don't have familiarity with it, there's probably aspects of this that don't resonate with me that maybe resonates with someone that's in that area. But I think fundamentally, a good film is a good film, regardless of what it is.
But you can, but
something.
wait, but you do understand that when people make make these movies, regardless of the culture, they're going to be informed and influenced by certain things, right?
Of course.
So it's not so it's not like, well, I'll use us as an example. Like if you and I were telling a story, right? You and I wouldn't necessarily tell a story the same way, right?
Very true. You're a much better storyteller than me. I will absolutely say that. You would kill me at the storytelling competition.
Right, but at the same time, you and I wouldn't necessarily tell the story in the same way that, say, that Scorsese or Spielberg would tell their stories, right? Or I would even say Kurosawa or Tarkovsky, when they tell their stories, they're telling their stories in completely different manners, right? But they are telling a story nevertheless. It's just their cultural sensibilities and their personal aesthetics informs and guides how they're going to go about telling that story. Because, if we'll use Solaris for example, right? Because because we looked at the 1972 classic last year, and then there was the George Clooney one that was made 20 something years ago, right? the George Clooney version plays, even though it's faithful to the original novel as opposed to the 1972 version, it's following it's following a story. Well, I wouldn't even say a story pattern, but it follows beats that would be more familiar, more palatable to to a Western audience, right? So it's less philosophical, it's less psychological. It doesn't really probe that deeply. It's not taking its time and trying to draw out the tension that you feel in Dr. Kelvin as he's experiencing the hallucination of his wife coming back, whereas when Tarkovsky did his version, yes, it's much longer, it's more drawn out, but as as he's drawing it out, you can feel the tension that's going on, and you can appreciate the deeper philosophical undertones of this, because it's not simply about a man experiencing hallucinations of his wife, as it is about the meaning of existence and what it means to be human, right? So yeah, you are right in that aspect, but I would also say too, that doesn't mean we approach every every movie the same way, right? Because if you're watching because if you're watching a Christopher Nolan film, you're going to approach it far more differently than if you're watching if you're watching a John Wick movie, right? Because a John Wick movie, obviously there's nothing deep going on. What you see is what you get. Whereas with something like Christopher Nolan or Tarkovsky or Fellini or or any other director for that matter, they are going to they may have more of an agenda or more of a message that's kind of buried beneath what we're seeing on screen, and we kind of have to sift through all of that just to get to it, right? But we could discuss the merits of film philosophy for hours. I would enjoy it. I don't know how much you would enjoy it, Lee. This is more of my wheelhouse, really. But without further ado,
I do appreciate talking about Kurosawa too, because Seven Samurai is another favorite of mine. So, but yes, that's unfortunately been redone 1,000 times by us in the U.S. and all the time. It's actually been worse, right? So I think there is absolutely freedom.
I will say this: the Magnificent Seven was the one with the one with Yul. I remember it was the one with Yul Brynner. I thought that was well done because it was taking the story beats that we were familiar with Seven Samurai and basically adapting it to an American context without necessarily sacrificing the main message of what Kurosawa was doing, right? Mm-hmm. So in that respect, yes, they did. There is a way. There is a way to kind of take something that is beloved in a foreign context and making it as relevant and meaningful in an American context, as opposed to Old Boy, where South Korean classic. It was a bit of a mind fuck, but we enjoyed it, as opposed to the one with Josh Brolin and Elizabeth Olsen. It's best we don't plumb those depths, but but let us know down in the comments below if you want to.
No, I'm not gonna watch Old Boy. Don't say that.
Well, no, what I was going to say was, let us know if you want us to do more episodes where we have more in-depth discussions about film aesthetics, because it's something that I would like to do, and we really don't do that much here because besides reviewing movies and reacting to trailers, we really don't have much going on, and I really would like to change that going forward, especially as we kind of go deeper and deeper into the film history, because I do plan on having you record an episode about Giallo at some point. But without further ado, so let's go ahead and dive into The Secret Agent, and I will start off by saying that the name was a bit of a misnomer, right? It's kind of like it's kind of like with weapons, really, because with weapons you expect it to be something like a slasher movie where it turns out it's about witches, whereas here in The Secret Agent you would think, oh, the main character is a secret agent, but no, it's actually taken from the title of a movie that just happens to be playing in the cinema.
I'm glad you noticed that too, because I was like, that's weird. Why is that secret agent? And I'm thinking the whole time I'm watching this, like, it's not a secret agent though, but I mean, there is enough, I would say, you don't really know what you're expecting as you go into it, right? And I think as you kind of watch it, there are aspects of it that make you think like, oh, maybe he could be, but then it kind of unravels as the story goes on.
They kind of hint at it too.
Yes. So it does play that very well, where you don't really know what to expect, which I think is both the highlight of the film, but maybe also played against it. And that's just, like I said, once again, how I kind of looked at it. So, but I guess first of all, right, I wanted to see, because obviously you're way more into history than me, a lot more knowledgeable about that stuff than I am. How familiar are you with this time period in Brazil, right? Because I don't have a lot of familiarity with it, but obviously it plays a huge aspect of kind of the movie. So how comfortable, how much do you know about this kind of time frame for Brazil?
Well, we're talking about this, the late 60s, and 70s. So we're talking about we're talking about a period in history where, where it's not just in Brazil, but in South America and Latin America, where we're seeing a lot of these, military dictatorships, or the juntas, as the kids like to call them, kind of take over. And I actually got a Wikipedia page pulled up here. Let me show this to you real quickly here so you can see. So you'll notice that here, like, the articles military junta. So that's the military government. You can see that you can see that a lot of these a lot of these countries in South America did undergo military dictatorships during that time. I mean, Argentina, 66 to 73, and then 76 to 83. Bolivia, most of the 70s and 80s.
Damn.
Brazil, we've got the one here, 64 to 85, the military dictatorship. Guatemala, Grenada, Haiti. We've got all these countries. So it's not like Brazil was the only country that was undergoing this kind of stuff. It was actually pretty common fare at that time too, and it wasn't necessarily just tied to South America, but we can also look at parts of Africa and Asia as well. You think of you remember that movie, The Last King of Scotland, about
Yes.
Idi Amin? That took place roughly around the same time period as well. And I would even say too, with my family as well, because they were living in Cambodia during the 70s. They underwent their own military, I wouldn't say military dictatorship, it was like a military government that was installed from 70 to 75, right? Oddly enough, one of my uncles was part of that regime as well. So, but it's interesting too, because we're talking about military dictatorships, but they're taking place in the wider context of the Cold War, right? So a lot of these military dictatorships, they're as they're rising and falling, they're being courted by either Washington or Moscow. So in the case of the Brazilian military dictatorship, they were pretty close to the White House, and and so much so that the U.S. government and the CIA actually helped the military come into power, because they saw, because they were pretty much alarmed by what was going on with the previous regime, and they wanted to make sure that that any government that comes into power is going to be friendly to us and not friendly to Moscow, because we're talking about a period where everybody is pretty much either for the West or against the West. You're either capitalist or communist. Now, that being said, these governments took a lot of liberties, and I use that word almost as a double entendre, because they took a lot of liberties and taking away liberties. They did a lot of unsavory things. I remember, sometimes we hear stories about how people just disappeared, the disparu, or the dirty wars. In the case of Latin America and Argentina, where people were just made to disappear because they either said something or they were just deemed a threat to the current regime, right? Oddly enough, it's funny we're talking about this because we're a month off from what happened in Venezuela. So, this isn't something that's just been contained to the 20th century. It's still ongoing, in a way.
Yep. Probably will never stop either, right?
No, because the mentality behind it is still prevalent. So it's not
Yes.
like it went away with with the end of the Cold War, right? Now it's just are you for Washington, or are you going to not be with us? And if you're not with us, well,
You're
we've
against us.
got we've got a few aircraft carriers that might have a say in the matter. And I think in this case it's a little bit more complex. What's interesting about the Brazilian Revolution, right, or the takeover, is the fact that there was no civil war, right? The president who got deposed decided, I'm not going to fight this. I'm just going to flee to Uruguay, Brazil. It's been nice knowing you, but I'm just going to go and hang out on my family property, and you guys do what you do, and I'm just going to, not get killed. And I'm just going about the rest of my days in another country.
Sometimes it's better just to bow out, because I think if you've been once you've seen how one dictatorship ends, you kind of get concerned that you're going to get your head put on the chopping block, so to say, or sometimes literally. So, but yeah. But thank you, because I think that having that knowledge about that helps with how much you're going to enjoy and appreciate this film, because it absolutely does a great job of, I think, putting you into kind of that world, especially for people that are, not familiar with that. Like, I felt like I understood more and more about what was going on by some of the, I would say, context clues that are out there. And really, it all starts at the very beginning, right? Because you have our lead, and I'm going to do my best, right, with pronunciations for names, because, everyone knows I suck with that. So I apologize if I butcher any names. Luca, I know, will help correct me on anything, because he's way better than I am. So I will try to muddle my way through this as we go.
I'm not sure if I'm going to the Portuguese, but I'll give it a shot.
Thank you, because there was some of this stuff that I was just like all over the place, and I don't know about you, but I also noticed, like, in the subtitles when I was watching it, like, some of the names changed over time, and I'm like, wait a minute, that was not spelled or didn't look like that before. So it just kind of was a little bit wonky, at least for my viewing experience with that. But we start off right. So we follow our lead, right? Armando, right? So he is our lead, and he is really our central character that we view everything with. And he's going to a place called Recife.
Yeah, Recife, I think.
Recife? Okay, Recife. There we go. We'll go with that. So we go with Recife. And he stops for gas, right? And it's kind of, it's surreal to kind of think about, because this is happening. It's 1977, right? Is when we're experiencing this, and he's stopping for gas, right? And I like how, as he stops for gas, there's just a dead body that's out on the ground, right? Now, I think anybody, if you just saw a dead body around, you'd probably be like a little bit of a panic, right? Like, that's probably not something you normally see, unless, unfortunately, like in a war zone or something. But you're probably not expected to experience that. And there's just a dead body, and it's been there for days, just like decomposing. Animals are going out there. And it's just sitting out there. And then all of a sudden, you see these police show up, and you're like looking around, and the police, they just kind of drive right by the dead body. And they kind of, like, I guess I would describe it, they try to shake down Armando, right? Because they're trying to get like funds. And I like how, from like a cinematography perspective, right, you see like there's like blood on the officer's like uniform, and you kind of get like a very quick glimpse of that to kind of like help like get a better idea that this guy's probably been cracking some heads and everything like that in this type of environment. So you kind of have this like, almost, it's kind of weird because you don't know anything about Armando, but you kind of have this tense feeling that you don't know what's happening, but you're worried about the police, right? You get this fear that they're going to do something bad to him because they're, for lack of a better word, corrupt. But luckily he was able to kind of talk his way out of it. And he's on his merry way, as he's going to Recife. And as he gets there, right, he meets, and this would be a rough one, the old lady, Donna Sebastiana.
I just said Sebastian. If that
Sebastian, helps. Sure. Donna Sebastian, right? So So he meets her there in Recife, and he ends up he's getting like an apartment or something there. They kind of described a little bit about the living arrangements. I'm just going to call it apartment. Um, and I like how, once again, right, when he meets her for the first time, she's like, "Hey, I'm going to call you Marcellus," right? And once again, we're getting this feel for this character. We don't really know a lot about him, but now, he's getting a nickname, or he's not using his real name. So once again, it kind of puts you in this idea of not being very sure about what's going on. And you start to meet some of the people at the apartment complex. So she just kind of shows them around, and you get to meet some of the other characters. Some of them are, I believe they were Angolan refugees. So, you're kind of getting a vibe a little bit about the area. There's a lot of interesting people with a lot of very distinct backgrounds that are living here at this apartment complex. But for Armando, right, his big thing is he's there to see his son, Fernando, right? And we find out that unfortunately, Armando's wife is dead. So Fernando has been living with his in-laws, in essence, in this area. So that kind of like, I guess, gives you a feel for, I guess, kind of where we're at with the story. And Luca, I guess I just want to take a brief moment to kind of stop and talk about that, right? Because we're about 30 minutes in. So we've met Armando. We don't really know anything about him. We're kind of like getting used to the environment that's here. How'd you like, I guess, how the director kind of helped immerse us into this, like, I guess, life, or how everything is kind of going on here in Brazil?
I mean, it is trying to show like this place is very much disorganized, right? I mean,
Yes.
pretty much every man for himself, really.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Like, this is definitely not a safe place, and not a place I would definitely want to be at night. And I think it's cool that it gives you an opportunity to, I guess, kind of get to know some of the people that will be around. Though I will have some qualms we'll talk about later with some of that. But I did kind of appreciate the fact that it allows you just to kind of exist in this world, and you start to kind of, you're almost like a self-insert for Armando, right? Because you don't really know him a lot. But, he's the lead guy you're following, so it's someone that you don't want to see anything happen to. And you kind of slowly get kind of bits of information from him regarding kind of everything that's going on. Okay? So once we're done with that, right, we kind of shift over. Well, one, we do meet a cop, right? And there's a whole story about a shark that ate a leg, right? Or, well, obviously probably ate more than just a leg. But they found a shark that had a leg in it. That popped up a lot more in the story than I was expecting. But I'll go ahead and call it out now in case we want to bring up the whole thing. But I think the other, to me, what kind of starts to drive the story along is we meet these two hitmen, right? So there's Bobby and Augusto. So these two hitmen, and we find out that they are being hired to kill Armando by this executive director for this company. The guy's name is Gorati, right? I'm just going to say it like that. Please correct me, Luca, or in the comments, people can tell me that's wrong. But, this is where, to me, we start to understand about the story, right? Now, this is about 40 minutes into the film, right? So we've seen Armando. He's met some random people. We know he has a kid. Now we see that he has a hit made out for him. This is about 40 minutes in. It's about 2.5 hour film, I would say. How did you feel about, I guess, the pacing? Did you feel bothered by, I guess, the pace it was going at? Or did you feel like it was at least giving you enough to remain invested in the story? What is kind of your feeling as you're going through this? Because we're about 40 minutes into the film.
Well, to your point, I mean, we're talking about a movie that is set in a time period that most people aren't familiar with, right?
Yeah.
So really, it's more of a chance to kind of introduce and immerse us in that world, because 1977 Brazil, not exactly the best place to be in unless you're
Yep.
you're with the elites, right?
Mhm.
And even then, you kind of have to look over your shoulder because you don't really know exactly what may or may not happen, right? We look at Armando where he gets stopped by the police, and he's really not sure what's going to happen to him,
Yep.
and you kind of have to wonder what exactly did this guy do, to get him noticed by the police, because initially you think, they're finally coming because the gas station owner is like, I've been haranguing you guys for days and days about this dead body, and now you're showing up, and they said, oh, we're, we're not here about the dead body, we don't know anything about that. So 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 for me, I guess I'm a bit more patient. Like I kind of like the fact that it gives you a chance to get immersed into this world and to
Yes.
actually see what's going on. And I would even give props to the cinematography, because you just get to see so much of what Brazil looks like at that time, right?
Oh yeah.
I
Absolutely.
mean, it probably still looks like that, today. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. I have not been to Brazil, but I absolutely agree with you on that. You definitely feel like, and I don't know how you capture like the 70s like this. Whenever I see this in movies, I'm always so impressed with how they're able to kind of like capture all of this, because you have to just be so familiar at the time. You have like cars, the clothes, like everything has to match that aesthetic. Because if you see something that breaks it, it's obviously very distracting. So kudos to them for that. And I do agree with you, right? I think from being an outsider looking into this, having the time to kind of spend and look at and kind of get a feel for the area helps me get more immersed in the story. Uh, so I wholeheartedly agree with you that I thought that was a very interesting thing to do. It allowed you just to get time to kind of just kind of get to know Brazil, or I guess Recife, right, specifically, as far as where we're at. So, um, so Armando, right? So he ends up getting a job working at this identity card office, right? And this is where he meets Officer Euclides, right? Who's, I don't know why that sounds too Greek to me, but this is where we meet this officer, right? And I like how the officer kind of takes it a liking to Armando, which Armando hates because he's trying to obviously keep a low profile. But lo and behold, he's sitting here and he's kind of getting buddy now with an officer. And during the break, right? So the officer invites him out to meet a Holocaust survivor that he doesn't realize is a Holocaust survivor, not a German soldier. Which I don't know. Did you feel like? How did you look at Officer Euclides and kind of his role in this film? Because there's times where I just feel like he's almost comic relief, but then on the other hand, I almost feel like the movie wants you to realize that the people in charge are so incompetent that they're actually going to believe that this guy that the officer is confusing a German soldier with a Jewish refugee. So what do you think about the officer's character? Because it definitely was kind of, I guess, interesting to see him throughout the film.
I mean, he's got a Boss Hog vibe to him, which is not too far off because the Dukes of Hazzard was a pretty big show in the 70s. So they're definitely
I
going
wonder
for
how
that.
big that was in Brazil. I wonder about that.
You got this big, fat, blustering, law enforcement guy who's just like going around slapping people on the shoulder and just saying the most inappropriate things, But at the same time, what I will say too is it took a while for me to process it, but you kind of figure out what the main story is. Everything else that you see is kind of superficial, really.
Yes,
And I told you this in the text yesterday, but it kind of reminds me of Paris, I Love You, or New York, I Love You, where you have all these little vignettes of like slice of life shots in different parts of New York, right, or Paris. Whereas here you get slice of life shots about different parts of Recife and Pernambuco, where you see this is what the police officers doing, this is what they're doing at the office here, this is what they're doing in the little refugee center over here. So you're getting a chance to you're getting a chance to see what life is like for for all different walks of life. And I will even say this too. I will give them props for showing the different full the full gamut of the racial spectrum in Brazil, right? Because it's very tempting to just present one ethnic group or one race, in this movie, right? But here they're showing us Afro Brazilians, mulattoes, mixed race people, you know, indigenous people all over the place. So they are definitely staying true to not only what's going on at the time, but in that location where we get to see that Brazil isn't just this, racially monolithic,
Yeah.
society, but it's very much, a wide spectrum of all these different people just, coming together and living together. And as we'll see later on, we see that, Marcellus or Armand was married to an Afro-Brazilian woman, right? So it's not, so I will give him props for not just taking the easy route and having him marry another white Brazilian, but kind of, I guess, quote unquote, staying true to what was going on at that time, because interracial marriages were pretty common, in that part of Brazil. Reasons why I won't for them I won't get too much into it. There are plenty of videos you can watch about that, but I will, but I will salute them for at least, not just, making Brazil, or at least the residents of Recife just members of one race. Like shows where you go to New York and all you see are white people, right? Or you go to, or you film something in South Africa and all you see is black people. You get to see so many different, people in so many different walks of life.
Mhm.
I will say this too. Another scene that kind of stands out to me is when when Euclides first enters the identity card office. It's commandeered by the police as, like, I think it's like an interrogation room or something like that, because one of the clients, or I guess say client, one of the clients is a very wealthy woman, right?
Mhm.
And she's she's in trouble because I guess she was held responsible for the death of a housekeeper's daughter.
Yeah.
And you get to see just how racially divisive it is, because obviously this woman looks like she's European, right? She could be from Italy or Spain or wherever. She's she's as European as they come. And then the housekeeper is very much, someone who's much darker skinned. Either she's black or she's mixed race. And you could sort of see that tension where she's demanding justice, and everyone's just like, you need to get out of her, get back. You're disturbing her. And it's like, well, objectively, you did do something pretty shitty, right? You could have been a bit more attentive, because you did send your housekeeper out to go do some chores for you. You could have at least, like, put the kid away where she can't just run after her mom and then she gets hit by a van or a truck or something. So
Mhm.
I thought that was a pretty moving scene right there. In this particular instance, before Euclides decided, maybe I'm not too interested in listening to these women complain. I'm gonna go bother this guy here who who looks who looks cool as fuck and is not typing like the rest of these guys are.
Yeah, and I do like it. And actually, I did find out. So that guy that plays the not the German soldier, as the officer thinks it is. So I'm sure you recognize that actor, right? His name is Udo Kier.
Yeah, I had to look it up because I was like, it looks kind of familiar. Where have I seen
Yeah,
this
yeah.
before?
I didn't realize that. I guess this was his final film because he actually passed away in November of 2025.
Yeah, yeah.
So this was probably his final film, and like I said, you know, kind of a super cool character too, right? Because I mean, doesn't get a whole lot of screen time, and obviously he's kind of just being kind of bullied by the officer, to show like all of his wounds and stuff, and you see like the gnarly like leg wound, and then he kind of opens up his shirt, and you can see like all the abuse that he's had to suffer through the years, and I kind of look at it like this guy's been abused all this time, and then he's, seeking refuge in this place. And you just have an officer that's just totally just doesn't care about anything that he's gone through. He's just like, yeah, man, show him your scars, even though he constantly says he doesn't want to show anything. But the guy just kind of pressures him to it. So I think to your point, right, you're talking about a guy that just feels like he owns everything. And he's sitting there almost like victimizing a survivor from the Holocaust again. So there's a lot of, like I said, they do a good job of helping like represent a lot of that stuff that's going on. So after Armando kind of leaves because he's kind of tired of dealing with the officer, he goes and visits his father-in-law, who works at this movie theater. So once he gets an opportunity to chat with him, he gets the father-in-law helps him get in contact with Elsa, right? So Elsa's kind of, I would say, kind of where we understand, or this is where we kind of get more about what's going on, right? So he speaks with Elsa, right? This director, or excuse me, this resistance leader. And during his story, he kind of recounts everything that's going on, and it helps us understand why Garati has put a hit out for him, right? So Armando, he was a professor, right? He was working on some projects, including one that dealt with lithium batteries that sounds like he has a patent for. So Armando and his wife have this meeting with Garati and his son. However, during this kind of like dinner, Garati and his son are obviously like two assholes, right? They're pretty much just belittling them and talking down to them like they're nothing. Garati even goes as much as to call him a communist. So like they kind of have this altercation where Armando ends up hitting Garati in the face. Or no, sorry, it was the son. I think it was the, excuse me, I apologize. It was the son that he hit in the face. And this is kind of the, I guess, the argument that helps us understand about Armando, about why he's, kind of out there, why he's, changing his name and everything. And it's all over kind of this argument that he had with this guy, because presumably, Garati's trying to get access to this lithium battery, and he's trying to get it through the help of like working with Armando. But Armando sees through it, which I did like too. He kind of calls it out, like, "You're not fooling anybody. I know why you're here." But I was curious from this argument, right? Because granted, I'm sure the guy felt a little bit belittled, but seems to be a lot that comes out of this argument about. I mean, I guess he did hit his son, but I don't know. Do you feel like everything that happened, do you feel like it warranted this Garati character having to go out and put a hit out on this guy to kill him?
I mean,
I guess we'll say it like that.
I mean, it's the culture of machismo, right? I mean,
it's true. Yep.
I mean, that's pretty typical in Latin American countries. I mean, these guys, they believe in honor, and if you insult my honor, well, I'm gonna deal with you the best way I know how. It seems pretty petty, but I think, I mean, there's an ulterior motive, because if it gets him out of the way, then who's to stop him from getting monopoly on the whole lithium ion battery?
Yep, exactly. Yep. Yeah, and it's kind of interesting, right, that you bring that up, because it's not something I feel like they go through a whole lot in the film, but it was something in the back of my head I'm thinking about. It's like, okay, if he does this, I feel like this is just another path for him to get what he's looking for. So I did find that to be, very interesting. So,
but I mean, but I mean, is Garati doing this because he just wants to get a monopoly in the energy sector? Like, is that?
Yeah, that's what I feel like that's what they're implying throughout, because I mean, we don't, to your point, right? I don't think we get a ton about kind of everything that's going on. We don't know a whole lot about his business, other than just kind of some of the stuff that we see. But that was always my understanding of it. It just felt like he, looked at this as an opportunity to, kind of utilize a patent in an area that's probably like, he's discovering this probably, and he doesn't probably understand the gravity of what he has, or at least the area doesn't have. So he's looking at this like, oh, this is a small thing, but this could be great for us. And he wants to go ahead and get full use of it, so he can, obviously utilize it to expand his wealth, as any greedy CEO of a company would do. But that's how I kind of looked at it. I would say that it was him wanting to get this extra energy, And I think that, the whole argument was just, I guess, kind of a guise for everything else that was going on.
I was gonna say the son did look a little bit like David Berkowitz. That was just another thing to kind of but I want to go back to another point because earlier when Euclides first comes onto the scene, he's investigating. Well, not investigating, but he's been called in because some biologists found a foot in a shark. Did they
Yes.
ever address like what happened with that, or is it just like one of those things where it's like, oh, we found a foot in a leg in a
No.
shark? And
No, I don't think I don't think we ever got any information about that.
because they make
But
a pretty huge deal about that because I mean
yeah,
because they do devote some scenes to where they go to the morgue and they swap it out, and then there's like some story about a hairy leg going around kicking a bunch of gay people, in the
yeah, I
park.
know, right? And it is weird, right? And it just goes to you. I am curious what your thoughts are about that as well, right? Because it is so weird, right? Because we do take time out of this movie, right? Where we're dealing with all this stuff, where there's almost this sequence where this leg literally comes to life and attacks people. To your point, right? There's gay people that are there. There's a lot of things that are going on in that park at night. Probably not a place you're taking your kids there, but they go to this park and they do like animate this leg, like just like hopping around and kicking people's butts, and it just feels so weird to me, and I don't know why they felt the need to introduce that. There is kind of that sequence where he goes back to those apartments, right? And the one of the Angolan refugees, the female one, she's like reading for the newspaper, and I don't know if it's supposed to represent that like the news is just like making shit up, and this is like kind of them representing that hey, this is making news as a truthful statement that this leg is going by kicking gay people's butts, because as I imagine with most dictatorships, there's always going to be people like political allies, all that type of, you're gay, straight, all that stuff is always going to factor into it. Almost makes me wonder if that was like, I would say them trying to say like, hey, if you're gay, we're going to kick your ass in this type of regime.
I mean, keep in
it.
mind too, the junta did have endorsements from the Catholic Church at that time, so
Yeah, Brazil's super Catholic, right? So,
I would say it plays on the theme of magical realism, because remember earlier on when Armand first arrives at the apartment, he sees a cat and the cat's got two faces on it,
yes.
right? And it's one of those things where it's like it's not a figment of his imagination. Everybody just acknowledges it exists and they just move on with it. So, so from the get-go, it kind of introduces this sort of level of surrealism that I would say is kind of typical with Latin American literature, right? And I know you don't read that much of this stuff, but back in high school there was a story that we read by Gabriel Marquez called A Very Old Man with Wings. It's about an angel who falls to earth, but nobody is treating him like an angel. They kind of just treat him as like a homeless old guy, and they kind of ignore the fact that this is supposed to be a heavenly being, but they just treat him like shit. So when I see something like the two-faced cat or the walking disembodied leg, it's not out of the ordinary, at least for me, because it's playing on those themes that's very typical with Latin American culture, because Latin American literature, because Latin American literature does, invoke a lot of magical surrealism, right? So obviously I mentioned A Very Old Man with Wings. Another interesting example is Jorge Luis Borges from Argentina, who pretty much writes in a very similar manner. And it's one of those things where it's like, magic and surrealism can coexist in the ordinary world. But to go back to your point about the leg going around kicking a bunch of gay people, obviously it's political messaging is them just saying, well, this is what we can, we're allowed to say, but we can't really say it this way, because if we say it this way, the government is going to put us on the list, and then, well, we can kiss our liberties goodbye. So they kind of, there's a lot of subtext you got to go through in order to understand, or at least appreciate what they're really, really trying to say here.
Yes.
Although, now that being said, I'm kind of curious as to why that was included in there, because it really doesn't go anywhere, right?
Yeah,
It does,
and sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Let me let you complete that, because that's going to get into, I think, my biggest gripe in the film.
I mean, it's just one of those things where it's like, yes, you can show us, what life is like in, Brazil in the 70s under the junta, but at the same time, I mean, there's sort of an understanding as to what you can and what you should show us or show the audience, right?
Yeah.
So, do we really need to see disembodied like hopping around?
Yes.
Not really. The two-faced cat I could sort of understand, because it's kind of noticeable, but it's kind of in the background. Disembodied leg hopping around kicking people in the face, it's going to be a bit more conspicuous.
Yeah, and I feel like tonally it definitely messes with how I like receive the film, right? Because I mean, it's just so out of place with everything going on. It was an interesting choice to kind of do that. And it's not like she just recounts the story. They literally show us. I mean, obviously, I'm not implying that this like did come to life and do all this. But they at least visually showed us what that would look like in that situation coming up. And he learns of the story with the hairy leg, right? So he's after he finds out from Elsa that he has this hit out for him and there's hitman coming for him. He kind of returns, and we now know that the apartment complex, which we kind of knew beforehand, but they kind of helped spell it out for us, is filled with refugees from all these other areas, which I thought was super interesting, right? Here's my big struggle with this, right? And I think you kind of got to it with what you were saying there, but I'm going to take it a step further. It's super cool that you're showing all these characters and kind of the struggles they're going through, right? Because these people are in hiding, so this is very much like a place that we're trying to keep people safe. My struggle is that we don't really spend any time with them, and I think that's my frustrating thing as I go through the film, is that there is aspects of this I really wanted them to follow, and then it just felt like it was just a footnote in the story, and that was, I think, the most frustrating thing for me, because you have all these characters. It's like, oh cool, you have these this couple from Angola that are refugees there. You have like Clovis, right, who's like the really young kid that was being mistreated by his parents because he wasn't trying to be there. The old lady, she's like an old like resistance leader. Like, they have such a cool collection of people, but then it almost feels like it's like, hey, we're just gonna tell you that this is what they are, but we're not gonna actually use it for anything important in the story. And I felt like, to me, I would have enjoyed this a lot more if there was a lot more focus on something. I just felt like there was not enough focus on certain aspects of this. And instead of trying to understand the broader world of Brazil in this time, I would have enjoyed it more if we got to see it through the eyes of these refugees.
Well, I disagree with you on that one.
Okay.
I mean, for me, as I'm reading this, Armand is he's kind of on the fence, right? He's not really a political guy, right? Because throughout the movie, because throughout the movie, he's not really for or against. He's just trying to survive. He's just trying to reunite with his son and just try to piece his life back together after his wife Fatima dies, right? So the other characters, if we're following the metaphor argument here, the other characters are pretty much representing probably what's going on in his head, because even though ostensibly he's coming off as someone who, well, I'm not really for or against anybody, right? Everybody has a political opinion, whether they want to admit it or not. So at least for me, these characters are representing what his thoughts are, just how extreme could he go in his thinking. Is he going to be a very resistant person like we see with Don Sebastian, who pretty much said, I've been doing this for quite some time, or is he going to be, or does he not want to admit that maybe he and Euclides maybe have a little bit more in common than he would like to admit, right? Because because Armand throughout the entire movie, we don't know what his political affiliations are. We don't know if he is for or against the junta. We don't know if he is a communist or a capitalist. Really, he gets called communist, but we don't know if if it really is Garrotti insulting him, or him just saying something that that Armand personally believes but doesn't really want to articulate, right? So we get to kind of see so just like with the leg hopping around and kicking people around, or the two-faced cat or whatever, the characters in that little compound kind of represent maybe represent what's going on inside of Armand's head in terms of his understanding of the situation, right? Because because even if you are living in a country where things aren't as ideal, right? You're being stopped over by the police, and shaken down for cigarettes or whatever. I mean, you still have an opinion about what's going on, and your experiences shape just how you view the world and how you view the politics that's playing around you, right? So what we see with I forget what the dentist lady was, that lady he was sleeping with, but
yeah. Sorry, I don't remember the name either, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
but but you kind of get the feeling that he sort of wants to embrace that resistant mindset, but he really doesn't want to go there. It's something that he's entertaining, he's flirting with, but he's not really sure if he wants to go there, because it's not really beneficial for him to kind of just come out and say, I want to do this, or I don't want to do this. It's just something that you think about, kind of like how people in different stages of their life will come out and say, yeah, I'm a ultra liberal, I believe in gay rights, I believe in gay marriage, I believe we should get rid of cars and all that stuff. And then at other points you're like, well, I'm a conservative, I do believe we need to close the borders, I do believe we need more law enforcement on the streets, that kind of stuff. So it kind of vacillates between these two positions, and I feel like what we're seeing with these characters kind of represent that kind of conflict that's going on in his mind, at least for me as I'm reading it.
That's interesting, because I mean, I feel like because we don't really know anything about the characters' backgrounds, that I mean, what do we really know about any of these people, right?
But we're not. But that's not the point, though, because because if the movie was trying to show us who they are as people, we would know a little bit more about them. But we're introduced to. But the first thing that we're mainly introduced in, that we're mainly focusing on, are their political ideas, right? So why focus on their political ideas if they're not relevant? Why not? I mean, to your point, why not just show us more of what these people are in the compound are doing? Why not? I mean, maybe the lady who he's sleeping with really is a dentist, and she's going around doing, running a practice and just interacting with other people, or delivering mangoes or whatever, right?
A dentist that sleeps with their patients.
Right, right. But I mean, if their personal lives were that important, obviously we would see more of it. But obviously, the movie puts a lot of focus on their political ideas and their beliefs. So, at least for me, as I'm looking at it, if that's the focus, then at least it's trying to represent what's going on. Not only in Brazil but also in Armand's head. I mean, because we did talk about that, severed leg, hopping around and kicking people, right? I mean, we obviously know that's an absurd, prospect, because we know severed limbs don't go hopping around kicking people.
This is true.
Unless you're a synth, because I watched Predator Badlands last night. So unless you're a synth, then yeah, you could probably get away with that. But for the most part, they don't, we can't reasonably, believe that that's going to happen. Right. So
very true.
So there's a lot of symbolism and a lot of that posturing that's going on that kind of gets played out in the sort of like surrealistic way that's quite typical of what we would see in Latin American literature, and even I would say like Hispanic art as well, because there's a lot of Salvador Dali elements, in this movie as I'm watching it, right? It's you can't. It's almost as if you can't quite believe what you're seeing, right? You kind of have to go back a little bit and just make sure. Okay, I know I'm not crazy. That cat really does have two faces. Okay, I'm really not that crazy. They they are having the Hans strip in front of everybody just so they can see his scars. Like it's it's the theater of the absurd, almost.
Yeah, no, yeah, and yeah, poor Hans. Like I used, that one always was really soul crushing to me because and I think that's probably comes from the fact that Holocaust is going to be so well known to most of the world. So I think you almost like just because it's something you're more familiar with, you have more of a stake in, or you have more of an understanding of what they go through, as opposed to maybe other things that we're not as familiar with, just because it's either something that we never taught in school, we never went out to get that additional information.
I mean, but also keep in mind too, like by the 70s, a lot of like former like German soldiers and Nazi sympathizers were pretty much all over the place in South America, right? I know everybody makes jokes about Argentina being like, a new Germany, but keep in mind too, there were a lot of Germans living in in Brazil at that time too. Obviously, if you remember Boys from Brazil, there's a lot of people who were tied to the Third Reich, decided, Brazil isn't too shabby of a place to call home,
Yeah, not to mention like what was it like Hitler really did survive and went to Argentina? Wasn't that like one of the crazy conspiracies out there?
Yeah, or one of his clones lives in Rio de Janeiro. So,
but yeah, so so Armando kind of tells the group that he's got some concerns out there right now, right? He's got two hitmen after him, and obviously he's trying to get out of there, and he's trying to get these passports, right? So he's able to escape with his son. So we get the kind of the transition over. So we follow the two hitmen that we saw earlier, right? And we're following them around, and they end up hiring an additional gunman, right? His name is Vilmar, which I thought was kind of weird, right? So it's kind of, it's like so they get hired to do a job, and
yeah,
they like kind of like
subcontract the work.
Hire, yeah, they like sub hire somebody else to do it for them, which I thought was funny because they were getting paid. What was it, like 40,000?
I think 60,000.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, they were arguing 40 to 60. I don't remember what they landed on. And then
it was 60,000, and they said, and then Vilmar said 40. So
no, he did 4,000.
Okay, 4,000.
Yeah, how much? Like, think about how much. So they're getting paid $60,000, and they're just hiring a dude to do it for 4,000. And that doesn't just represent the power dynamic there.
Yeah, they pocket the difference. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Lee, you studied business in school. You should know all about this, man.
This is true. This is true. Yeah, I mean they're making quite a bit of money off of Vilmar there, with what they got going on. So, so they do know that the father-in-law is at the movie theater, right where he works. So the hitmen go there. They don't actually get in contact with the father-in-law, but Vilmar, right, the new gunman, he sees him walking out, so he follows him to the identity card office, and it's kind of where Armando gets outed. Now, I thought Armando did an awesome job here. I really like this with him, where he knows that this Vilmar guy is out there and looking for him. He doesn't really react to his name, but you can kind of tell like he's a little bit off-putting. So what does Armando do? Well, he goes to that douchebag police officer Euclides, and it's pretty much like, hey, you know what? We got this guy's harassing women down there. So he's able to convince him to send him down with two police officers, right? And this is where we kind of have this, big altercation where the Vilmar ends up shooting the two cops, and really gruesome, like in a very gruesome style. Like
that really shocked me. Like when Orlando, the black cop, he gets shot in the eye, and then the other guy gets he gets grazed, but it looks like half of his face is coming off.
Yeah, like it's like it goes through like his face on one side and then he gets shot in the other. And I don't know if we ever like really find out, and it's not super critical, but I just assume they're dead. But both of them were taken to the hospital. But Vilmar, he gets injured, or he's like shot in the leg, right? So he kind of escapes. So Bobby, right? He's one of the two hitmen. He's following Vilmar, presumably to like, I guess he wants to kill him, right? Because he's killed two cops, so he probably doesn't want Vilmar to spill the beans on them. That's what I kind of interpreted from this. He's following Vilmar around, and Vilmar ends up shooting Bobby in the back of the head, killing him, and he kind of mutters something to him because when Bobby met Vilmar, he's like, kind of describes as an animal. So Vilmar kind of felt good about shooting this guy in the back of the head. But is that kind of what you got from it? Because like I wasn't really sure what Bobby was doing, but my only thing was that he saw the two cops get shot, and I figured that he was like, oh well, I guess then I need to kill this guy because he might out me and my dad.
Stepdad?
Stepdad, yes. I'm sorry, stepdad, yes. That's right. So, but
yeah, no loose ends, basically.
Yes. Okay, I just want to make sure because I was like kind of watching like it's kind of weird, but then it made more sense. I was thinking about it, and so that is really how the story ends. And I'm gonna put big air quotes around that, right? Because there's one aspect of this we're gonna go ahead and talk about now, which is so wasn't really discussed in the review, but this movie is there's like a group of researchers in the present time that are listening to these cassette tapes with this information. So they're listening to the stuff, and we find out through them that Armando was actually killed. And well, I'll hold off on that for a second, right? So the researcher, she ends up going out and she finds Fernando, right, his son, who is now works at a doctor's office in Recife, right, which is actually the doctor's office is where the movie theater that the father-in-law lived at, or excuse me, was working at, excuse me. And you kind of see like the two kind of interact, and they're kind of talking about Armando. And Fernando kind of admits that, you know what, I just don't really remember that much about my father, which was kind of an interesting way to kind of end the film. But I was kind of interested in your take because this was something that really bugged me. Why show Armando's death the way that they did, where he's not even really killed on screen? You just kind of see like a snapshot of him being killed. Why do you feel like they decided to go that route?
Well, I would take a step back and just say I found it kind of distracting that they kept alternating between the present and 1977.
Oh yes, yeah, for sure, right? And that's why I didn't even bother to really reference it, because it was such a not needed story element to it that I just figured I would only bring up because you have to kind of talk about the end, because that's kind of where, I mean, you literally spend like the last 10 minutes of the film with the kind of the researcher and kind of seeing her, like kind of her family, and then going to see Fernando and everything. But yeah, I was just, I don't know, something felt very weird to me that you're going to spend this whole movie following Armando, and then you just kind of find out that he just gets killed sometime afterwards. And I'm presuming a very short time after these events happen. And that was just, I don't know, that just felt like
it felt rushed. That's what it is.
It felt like I would consider it, yeah, it felt like a poor decision for me, right? And I'll just kind of phrase it like that, because to me, if you want us to be invested in these characters, if you want me to be invested in Armando, right, which is really the only character that we really have an opportunity to know, it just feels weird that you treat his death like a blip on the radar. Now, you could make an argument that, hey, you know what, in the grand scheme of things, this is more about, Brazil and everything that's going on in that area. So, Armando dying, he is just a blip on the radar of all the other terrible shit that happened.
Yeah, I mean,
But
he's just one of the many casualties, really.
yeah, exactly, right. And you can easily make the argument, right? And I won't deny that for a second. But as a moviegoer goes, right, I'm going to be more invested in the story of these characters, and to have him kind of just be killed like that, it just felt like, that was maybe not the way I would have gone to help get closure for a character that we're ultimately rooting for, right? Regardless of what you feel like the focal point is. And that's really the end of it. So, I guess I'll start with my feelings about this, right? Um, the acting, fantastic, right? Absolutely I love the acting in this. I really like to be able to see these characters, and obviously a lot of actors and actresses that I've never seen before, right? Except for, like I said, that one German soldier, or excuse me, not the German soldier, the Holocaust survivor, which I've kind of seen in the past, but not really familiar with any of the actors, actresses that are part of this. But the acting was super good. Cinematography, so good, right? So good. I just love the feel for this. I love kind of like the soundtrack when it picks up. There's so many cool elements with it that I just really enjoyed it. And the way that I absolutely felt like I was in 70s Brazil, which I don't have a reference for, but if you tell me that was 70s Brazil, I would absolutely believe it. Because I feel like we truly got immersed into everything that's going on there. My big challenge, or the issue that I had throughout this, is that it felt like an extremely slow burn where we kind of get very minor information about the characters, but I don't feel like we ever flesh out or understand most of the characters or even what they want to be. I feel like we're introduced to so many kind of like ancillary things, like, hey, we're gonna follow this police officer and his son, and his like son that's not really his son, but he treats him like a son. And then we're going to see like these hitmen, and there's like a time where you kind of see like the hitman, and they killed somebody. We don't find out who the person is. We're just kind of like shown that, hey, they're hitmen that kill people. And then we get out there and go do that. We see Armando kind of interact with, a lot of people that are at the like refugee camp, right? And I don't really want to phrase it like that, but kind of like this place where they're all kind of in hiding. And I think that you have so many interesting characters and backgrounds, but we never really get to flesh them out. Everything just felt, to me, right? It just kind of felt extremely high level, and I wanted them to dig deeper into everything that's going on. And I just felt like that was a missed opportunity.
So,
And that
so Lee, it sounds like you're saying they were putting emphasis on the wrong characters. Is that it?
Yeah, I would say that's definitely a part of it, right? Because I mean, we see some of these characters, but to me, I wanted to spend, screen time with Armando, right? I want to understand more about Armando, his, relationship with this kid, how much it means to him, what the plan is. We have a resistance leader that shows up, and she's just kind of there, be like, yeah, I'm a resistance leader. And we're going to try to get you these passports to get you out of here. And then, we have, all the stuff with the leg, the hitmen that are out there. We see so many of these characters, and we get so much of this stuff, but it's just like, it almost feels like it's like, once we see them, they get moved on to something else, and we're just constantly moving around, where I just don't feel like the story ever focused on one thing, right? I mean, obviously it focused on Armando, but I feel like he didn't get, to me, the story that he should have got, and to me, that's what kind of lost me with it. So, I would say for me, I would probably give this, I would say, a 3 out of 5. I enjoyed it for the most part. I can appreciate that, we're kind of looking at something in a time period in a place that I'm not familiar with. But I think the director does such a good job of helping depict that. I just wish that there was maybe more focus on a few things instead of trying to touch everything. Hey, if I just focus on Armando and maybe just knowing more about the resistance movement, or hey, I'm gonna have Armando, I'm gonna focus more about the other refugees that are there, and maybe how they're all surviving or going through the struggles that they're going through. But instead, I feel like, oh, we're gonna find out about Armando, and then we're gonna get stuff about these cops, and now we're gonna talk about this hitman, and then the hitman's gonna get another hitman. Like, I didn't need all that to enjoy the story. And then the other thing is, like, it just felt like such a weak way to end the film to have Armando kind of killed off screen. I think that kind of, to me, kind of ruined anything that I was hoping to gain from this character. And that kind of took me out of it. So I would say I would give it a 3 out of 5. I would say that it's a worthy watch, but it's definitely a slow burn. It is over 2.5 hours. So I definitely felt the length at times. I will say, unfortunately, I did kind of at one stage fall asleep in one of them, though granted, I only slept like 4 hours before. So it was not so much the movie, but I think my overall tiredness, but I definitely had to go rewatch it because I missed the part that I actually slept through was the leg sequence, which I thought so weird that I slept through that part as opposed to anything else. But yeah, that's my final take on it.
I'll give it a 3.1 out of 5. I mean, I really do enjoy the cinematography. And I do enjoy the fact that we get to see Brazil in the 70s, and I really do appreciate the fact that it's not just presenting us like a generic, portrayal of a Latin American city, but an actual city that's lived in, right, populated by actual people and people with with actual hopes and dreams, and who actually have ambitions, and they don't want to die, and and you really do feel for Armand because this is someone who wants to make it out of here, right?
Yeah.
Now, I will agree. The ending was a bit of a cop out. It would have been interesting to see like what would have happened. I'm assuming it was Augusta who got him at the end because obviously Vilmar. Vilmar, I guess fucked off somewhere, and well, obviously Bobby's not doing anything because he's bleeding out in the barbershop.
He's got a pulse head.
But at the same time, it's just one of those things where it's like, did it really need to be 2 hours and 40 minutes? Like, it could have been a lot shorter. Yeah. But at the same time, it's just such a visually rich, movie. 100%. Like, I would even go so far as to say I kind of appreciate the visual aspect more than I did with Frankenstein, really, or even Wicked for Good, because with those movies. Yeah, they're visually rich, but there's something artificial about it, right?
Yes, absolutely, yes. I like that. Yeah.
Whereas here, it's believable. You can believe that people live in these homes. You can believe that people, are having to maintain these places because they're not pristine. What I really like is there's that one scene where Bobby goes to the movie theater and the guys that just dump like soapy water onto the floor and they're just scrubbing it out. I don't know why, but I enjoyed it because it just shows that this is a real place. This isn't some clean palace like what we saw in the Emerald City, but this is a place that has it gets dirty because you get a lot of people coming in and out. And I think at one point, I think one of the ladies was thrashing because she saw The Exorcist or something.
I thought was it The Exorcist or The Omen?
Or maybe it might have been The Omen, but the way she was moving around, I kept thinking, but the way she was moving around, I kept thinking maybe she might have seen The Exorcist because why else would you act like that?
Yeah, because I know. So The Exorcist came out in 73, right, and then The Omen came out in 76.
Right, so, and we do see clips of The Omen playing in the theater.
Yeah, and that's the only reason that made me think of The Omen. I agree. I don't know why. I mean, obviously The Omen. Spoiler alert, deals with, the devil's in it, right? Or kind of, sort of hard to explain, but won't get into that part of it. It was weird. I was kind of curious to see what other films were playing, honestly, because they talk about Jaws, and I was kind of curious to see what other things were playing at this time frame, because it is interesting to think about. It's really a time capsule of that time.
And we do see a brief shot of the secret agent playing on screen. Which I thought was quite interesting that they would take the title of that movie and use it for the title of this movie. Not too big of a deal, but I felt like, you could have come up with a much better title, in my opinion. But it's not something that I'm going to lose sleep over. Because I do get eight hours of sleep as opposed to you. So Lee, to keep you awake, why don't you go ahead and take us out here?
But no, I like I said, I appreciate everyone for listening to us and checking everything out with this. I think that, to your point, Luca, there's absolutely a ton of good like foreign films that are out there, and I think you're right. I think there's a good opportunity for us to review more and more of this stuff. I know I've referenced like City of God before, and probably some of my other reviews, as being like one of my, a movie I saw during college that I just thoroughly enjoyed, which is also takes place in Brazil. So I do think that there's tons of awesome movies that are out there that, kind of gives an opportunity to go out there and, see something different, and experience something different, especially out of, stuff that we're probably not so familiar with, right? And City of God also kind of takes place in Rio de Janeiro, and it kind of expands from the late 60s to, I want to say, like the early 80s, if I recall correctly. So I think kind of in this same time frame, that we're watching this is also that film. So I think that there's a lot of cool things that are out there. I love the fact that you mentioned so many really prolific foreign directors that we probably don't give a lot of credit to. But a lot of these things have very much shaped stuff that you see here in the US, right? In Hollywood, right? Because some of these directors, they watch these films and they just pull aspects of it into their films. And you'll see a lot of people reference that. I know, for instance, The Matrix, I always talk about Ghost in the Shell, right? So a very popular, anime from Japan. And that was a huge kind of stepping block for The Matrix, right? And the Wachowski brothers, Wachowski sisters, whatever, they got a lot of inspiration from that. So I think that there's, a lot of good things out there that people should check out. And I do agree with you that we'll be able to get some, check out some more of these types of films. I'm sorry. Yeah. Well,
I was going to say, you are a Nolan fanboy, and I was going to say Nolan definitely named Andrei Tarkovsky as one of his influences. So we should look at a Tarkovsky film together.
Yeah. Yep, I downloaded Stalker because I wanted to watch it, and then I didn't realize that you were doing a review about it when I was actually wanted to check it out, which I thought was interesting because I don't think that we were talking about Tarkovsky at the time, and I happened to see Stalker pop up. I'm like, oh, that's interesting, and then I remember seeing I'm gonna review this. I'm like, oh, really? That's so weird that we were both looking at that film. And I'm not sure what kind of promoted it both to happen, but
it's in the season 4 playlist. You can check it out.
Yeah. But... Oh no, yeah, I did. So it was weird when I was wanting to watch it. You happened to be doing something totally separate of me that was there. So I just thought for the timing it was very.
I can't sit and wait for you forever, man. I mean, either you get with the program or you don't. But yeah, go ahead and take us out, man.
Yeah, no. So I appreciate everyone for checking this out, and definitely looking forward to doing some more of these things. I know we're right at the tail end of the Oscar season, right? So a lot of movies have been put up for that. Notice I didn't say good, but I think we can appreciate that there are some good things out there, and it's always good to see foreign films get a shot, right? I'm glad something like Parasite won a few years back. So I'm glad to see that we're willing and open to go out there and kind of check out some of these other films that I think get overlooked just because they're not in Hollywood, but certainly doesn't detract them from being good films.